The wind came first long before the sound of hooves or the cry of any living thing. It swept across the dry grasslands, bending the yellow stalks in weary submission, carrying the scent of iron and dust. Beneath it, the river crawled thin and slow through the hollow earth, its banks cracked like an old man's hands. The sky had that color of ash right before rain, but never delivered any. It had been months since a storm. Months since a blessing. Elias Ward rode along the ridge, reins loose, his hat pulled low. His horse's breath steamed faintly in the morning chill, though the sun already promised heat. He had been riding since dawn, checking fences that no longer held cattle and listening to the sound of his own loneliness echo through the plains. The ranch had been his father's once, and before that, his grandfather's. Now it was his, and yet it felt less a gift than a sentence. The land had grown meaner these past few years. Drought turned fields to bone, and the town down in Hollow Creek emptied bit by bit, families packing wagons, chasing promises west. Elias had stayed, not out of hope, but because he had nowhere else to go. A man who stays too long in one place, watching everything leave him, starts to look like part of the landscape, worn, wind-cut, silent. He dismounted at the river crossing to let his horse drink. That was when he saw them. At first, it was only movement, a flicker of fabric near the water's edge. Then a sound reached him, soft but sharp, like a wounded thing trying not to be heard. Children, 6 of them, huddled close, their faces pale beneath layers of dirt. One of the smallest clutched a doll missing its head. Another sat knee-deep in the shallows, staring into the current as if hoping to find something there. And a woman, thin, her skirt torn at the hem, hair loose from its pins, stood a few feet away. She was holding the edge of her shawl tight, her shoulders shaking though the air was still. Her eyes were on the water, unfocused, as though the river itself might offer an answer to a question too heavy to carry. Elias hesitated. He had learned long ago not to meddle in other people's grief, but there was something about the way the woman's knees bent, just slightly, as if the strength might be leaving her legs, that drew him down from his horse. "Ma'am," he called, voice rough from disuse. "You folks lost?" She startled, turning too quickly. Her face was streaked with mud and tears, but her eyes, gray as storm cloud glass, met his with a steadiness that surprised him. "We ain't lost," she said, though the words wavered. "Just know where to go." The children looked up at him, silent, expectant. Elias nodded slowly. "River's not much company," he said. "Best come up from there before it swallows one of you." For a moment she said nothing, only clutched the youngest child closer. Then she nodded. Together they climbed the embankment, slow and cautious, as though every step required permission from the earth itself. When they reached the top, Elias saw the wagon broken wheel, splintered axle, the canvas torn open like a wound. The mule lay still beside it, ribs sharp against its hide. He exhaled. "You headed west?" "Was," she murmured, "until that their beast gave out. Been walking since yesterday. My name's Clara Morrow." He tipped his hat. "Elias Ward." There was a pause, heavy as thunder before a storm. The children watched him, their eyes wide but unreadable. Hunger does, that it takes the shine out of young eyes. "You got kin near?" he asked. She shook her head. "No one left that'd take us." He looked toward the horizon. His ranch lay another mile east, empty save for him and the ghosts that came with sundown. "There's shelter at my place," he said finally. "Ain't much, but it's dry." Clara blinked, as if unsure she'd heard right. "We wouldn't want to trouble—" "You already look troubled," he interrupted softly. "Ain't no shame in restin'." Her lips parted, and for the first time he saw the faintest trace of defiance, the spark of someone who had fought too long to let pride go easily. But then the smallest child began to cry, thin and tired, and she pressed her palm to his head, her decision already made. Elias turned, motioning toward his horse. "You can ride, I'll walk." She hesitated only once more, then nodded. He lifted 2 of the children into the saddle before helping her mount. The horse shifted, uneasy with the weight, but held steady. Elias took the reins and began leading them across the plain, the sun crawling higher, turning the horizon to molten gold. Behind them, the river kept whispering to itself, as if remembering what had been lost. He led them toward the cottonwoods that gathered at the edge of his place, their leaves shivering though the air was still. The house waited with its porch boards cupped in gray, the barn hulking beside it like an old dog that refused to lie down. Dust filmed every surface. A bucket hung from the well crank, the rope stiff with disuse. He set the reins over a post and reached for the pump handle, working it until the water came grudging, then clean and cold. The children watched the stream as if it were a miracle. He cupped his hand and tasted metal. Good enough. Inside, the kitchen smelled of dry flour and iron. He stirred up the stove, coaxing fire from a stingy pile of kindling. The sounds of settling wood, the rasp of the draft, the first lick of heat, wrapped the room in a relief so gentle it dared no one to speak. He set a coffee pot to boil and found a sack of beans and the end of a side of salt pork. It was not much, but it sang when it met the pan. He split biscuits from a tin, their edges hard, their hearts still good if you gave them steam and a little mercy. The smallest boy fell asleep at the table with his cheek on his arm. Elias covered him with his own coat. The girl with the headless doll kept its soft body upright and fed it invisible spoonfuls of air. Another child, freckled and watchful, asked for nothing but stared at the skillet as if memorizing the sound of fat. When he set plates in front of them, they ate with that fierce quiet of the hungry, not glancing up until their mouths were full, thankful without the burden of words. She stood nearby, hands clasped, refusing to sit until the children had finished. The color returned slowly to her face, and when she sank into a chair at last, she did not touch the food at once. She stared at her fingers, which were cracked at the knuckles, and worked a ring that was not there. He looked away, respectful of ghosts. In the hush that followed, a coyote called out beyond the barn. The sound lifted and fell like a lonely horn, then dropped into the weeds. She flinched at it, just a thread of movement, as if some other night had torn open inside her and spilled its cold along her bones. He poured a tin cup of coffee and slid it across the table. She did not thank him, only wrapped her fingers around the warmth as if it were a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. When the children were settled in the spare room, stacked like cordwood along pallets and folded quilts, he went to the doorway and stood with her, watching them breathe. The lamplight smoothed their faces. A thumb slipped from a mouth. A knee jerked. A whisper rose and fell from a dream. She leaned her shoulder against the frame, so lightly it could have been an accident. He felt the pressure of it through the oak, as if it were a hand on his chest. Back in the kitchen, the kettle sighed. She cleaned her plate with a crust of biscuit, and then she did something he did not expect at all. She got up and began to wash the dishes. He said there was no need, but she shook her head and kept at it. The rhythm of water and tin soothed the corners of the house where dust kept memories. He took up a towel, and they moved in a slow circle around the sink, passing plates, saying little. The quiet between them was not empty. It felt like a field after rain, dark and ready. He found blankets and a shirt of his own for the eldest boy who had torn his sleeve. She folded the shirt with care, the way a person does when there is dignity to be salvaged from ruin. When she spoke, her voice had lost its tremor. "We were meant to stop at a cousin's place 2 days back," she said, but the cousin had moved on and left no direction. The wheel gave, the mule followed, and the rest was a stretch of hours none of them would choose to remember. She did not say the word widow. She did not say what the river had nearly taken. Elias listened without questions. He poured more coffee, then put the pot away and folded the towel along the seam, as if sewing his thoughts shut. He told her about a windmill that had stood on the hill when he was a boy, how the blades used to catch the afternoon light and throw it around like handfuls of coins. His father swore that as long as the windmill turned, the herd would find its way home. A storm took it the winter his father died. He had not put up another. Maybe the land had wanted the story to end. She glanced toward the dark window where a pane held a hairline crack that looked like a map of a place no one had visited. "Your father believed in signs," she said softly. "He did," Elias answered, surprised at the ease of the reply. He had not spoken of his father aloud in years. A man keeps his soft parts where he can guard them. Tonight, the guard had grown tired. The lamp wick fluttered. Outside, the wind picked up the dry grass and pressed it flat. He said they could stay in the house until the wagon was mended and the road resembled a road again. She nodded, the kind of nod that meant she would work to deserve it. He saw that in her posture, in the way she had already straightened the coffee tin and set the skillet to season on the back of the stove. When he stepped onto the porch for air, the night met him with the taste of iron and an old hint of rain. He thought of the windmill, of the shape it made against the winter sky, and of small palms gripping a saddle horn with trust unearned. He thought of how a man might rebuild something not because he believed, but because someone else needed a reason to. From the road, faint and far, came the creak of a wagon that did not belong to him. The sound carried strange on the wind, a slow, uneven rhythm, as though the world itself were limping. Elias stood still, listening. The night was open, the sky star-punched and enormous. He could make out the faint shape of the wagon road cutting along the rise, a line of silver dust under the moon. Then he saw the lantern. It swung low, the light weak and golden, swaying in a man's hand. He went inside and took his rifle from behind the door. The woman Clara looked up from where she sat near the sleeping children. Her eyes caught the lamplight, questioning but calm. "Someone's comin'," he said. She rose, tucking her shawl close. Who would be out at this hour? He shook his head. Only one way to know. Outside, the horse snorted, restless. Elias waited on the porch until the wagon drew near enough for him to see the driver's face. It was a thin, sharp thing, leathered and hard. The man wore a deputy's badge, dark with tarnish. Behind him sat another figure, older, a woman in a bonnet, stiff with dust. The wagon creaked to a halt at the gate. "Ward," the deputy called. "Elias Ward?" Elias kept his voice level. "That's right." The man nodded. "Name's Clancy. Sheriff out of Red Bluff sent me. Been trailing a family near 3 days. Woman and some children. Folks say they ran off with goods from a general store 2 towns east." Clara's breath caught behind him, quiet but sharp. He did not turn. "What kind of goods?" Elias asked. "Flour, coffee, little salt, maybe worth $1 all told," the deputy said. "Store keeps a bitter man, but the law's the law." He leaned forward, squinting toward the porch. "You seen a woman and young ones come by?" The silence between them stretched thin as wire. The wind brushed through the grass, whispering like something alive. "I seen no thieves," Elias said. "Only folks near starved." The deputy studied him, lips twitching around a smirk. "That's so. Well, you'd best mind your tongue. Harboring outlaws don't sit kindly with the county." The older woman in the wagon cleared her throat. "Clancy, they're children," she muttered. "Let's move on." He ignored her. "I'll check your place, Ward." Elias stepped off the porch, slow and deliberate. "You'll not step a foot past that gate tonight. Come back with a warrant if you've got the will for it." Clancy spat into the dust, eyes hard. "You playin' at something, rancher?" Elias met his gaze, unblinking. "No, just tired of men who pick on the hungry." The deputy's hand twitched toward his hip, then fell away. He muttered something under his breath, flicked the reins, and the wagon groaned forward, vanishing into the dark. The echo of its wheels lingered a long time after. Elias waited until the sound was gone before lowering the rifle. His pulse still beat heavy in his throat. When he turned, Clara stood in the doorway, her face pale in the moonlight. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. He shrugged. "Man like that won't ride far for a crust of bread." Her eyes filled but did not spill. "You don't know him, or the kind of trouble that follows." "Then I'll learn," he said simply. She stepped out onto the porch, close enough that he could smell the faint sweetness of lye soap on her skin. "You risked your name for strangers." He looked past her to where the children slept, their small shapes breathing in rhythm. Not strangers anymore. Something in her face shifted, part fear, part wonder. The night wrapped them in silence. Over the next days, the ranch changed its rhythm. Clara rose before dawn, her hair tied back in a strip of cloth. She learned the pump's stubborn pull, the way to coax the stove's fire without smoke, the trick of gathering eggs before the hens grew mean. The children followed her like sparrows, chirping, quarreling, laughing in bursts that startled Elias each time. Laughter had been gone so long he'd forgotten its weight. He worked beside them, mending fences, breaking soil that had hardened to clay. She helped with the garden, her hands blistered but steady. Once, as the sun leaned west, he looked up to see her standing by the trough, her skirt hem dark with water, the smallest child perched on her hip. For an instant, the light caught her hair and turned it to copper fire. Something in him gave way, a quiet collapse. He did not fight. At supper, she told him about her husband, a railroad man, gone under a landslide near Carson 2 winters back. She spoke without tears, her voice stripped clean of the softness that grief once used to excuse itself. After that, there was just the road, she said, and the trying. He nodded. Trying's the only thing that ever takes. That night, he fixed the broken hinge on the barn door, working by lamplight. When he turned, she was there, holding a lantern. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting us be human again." He could not answer. She stepped closer, the glow trembling between them, and for a moment he thought she might touch his arm. But she only looked up, meeting his eyes with something steadier than gratitude. In the distance, a thunderhead rolled along the horizon. The smell of rain came sudden and raw, lifting dust and memory alike. Elias raised his face to the sky. "Looks like the drought's breakin'," he said. "Maybe so," she murmured. The first drop struck the earth like promises too long withheld. The rain came in hard that night, an honest, soaking storm that tore the dust from the air and brought the scent of living things back to the land. The roof creaked and sighed, the old boards of the porch rattling like teeth. Elias sat by the window with the lamp turned low, watching the black shapes of the cottonwoods bend and straighten in the wind. Beside the hearth, the children slept in a pile of quilts, all but the eldest boy, who watched the fire with his chin on his knees, his face flickering between shadow and gold. Clara came down from the loft, her shawl wrapped tight. She looked older in the lamplight, tired, not from years but from the kind of living that steals time. "The little one's coughing less," she said softly. "That's good." Elias poured coffee into a tin cup and offered it. She took it without a word and sat across from him. The rain filled the silence between them. "Never thought I'd hear rain again," he said after a while. She nodded. "Feels like it's washing the bones clean." They sat that way for a long time, the storm muttering outside, the room shrinking to the glow of the fire, and the soft breathing of the children. Something in the stillness loosened between them, some unspoken thread stretching taut and fragile. Elias found himself studying her hands, the fine scars along her knuckles, the ring-shaped hollow where gold once rested. "You'll stay," he said suddenly. It wasn't a question. She looked up, startled, eyes glinting in the lamplight. "Stay?" He nodded. "The ground's ready to plant again. Could use help, and the little ones, they'll need steadiness." She hesitated, as though weighing something heavier than pride. "We'd earn our keep," she said. "You already have." The words seemed to undo her. She looked away, blinking fast, and when she spoke, her voice was barely more than breath. "I can't bring more ruin to another man's door." Elias leaned back, his voice quiet but steady. "You've brought life, Clara. This place ain't heard laughter in years. I reckon that counts for something." The rain slowed, softening to a whisper. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she rose, setting the cup aside, and went to the window. The first light of dawn was beginning to show, pale and wet. "If the land can start over," she said, "maybe folks can too." The days that followed carried the rhythm of work and recovery. The soil drank deep, and green began to show in patches where nothing had lived for years. Elias taught the older children to mend harness and throw seed, his rough patience meeting their cautious eagerness. Clara took to the chores as if she'd been born to them, though each evening left her shoulders bowed and her palms raw. Still, she did not complain. There was strength in her silence, and Elias found himself listening for it even when she wasn't near. Once, in the cool of early morning, he caught sight of her by the fence line, hair loose, humming low to herself while hanging the wash. The tune was unfamiliar, sad but steady, like a prayer that had forgotten who it was meant for. When she turned and saw him, she smiled, and it felt like the whole plain breathed easier. But peace, he knew, was a thing the world seldom let rest. By midsummer, word reached Hollow Creek that Sheriff Clancy had been asking questions again. He'd come through the trading post, waving a writ, claiming he'd return to search the ranch if he had to. Elias heard it from a peddler, a man who sold sewing needles and gossip in equal measure. That evening, when he told Clara, her face went white. "He won't stop," she said. "He's one of them that likes the power more than the justice." Elias nodded. "Then we'll be ready." He spent the next day fixing the corral gate, though his eyes kept scanning the ridge. The air felt heavy, the kind that warns of both storm and trouble. When the wagon did appear, just before sundown, he wasn't surprised. Clancy climbed down, boots sinking in the mud. 2 other men followed, guns at their hips. "Evenin', Ward," the sheriff drawled. "Time we settled our business." Elias stood at the fence, rifle in the crook of his arm but not raised. "Ain't no business here worth the metal you carry." Clancy smirked. "You think you can stand between the law and its duty?" "If you called it duty, I might." Clancy's face darkened. "Move aside." Before Elias could speak, the house door opened. Clara stepped out, the smallest child clinging to her skirt. Her voice carried clear and calm. "You can take what we owe. I'll not have blood spilled over bread." Clancy hesitated, thrown by the sight of her. The rain from days past had turned the air soft. Light from the setting sun caught her hair and turned it bronze. She stood straight, unflinching. "We stole nothing you'd defend in church," she said. "But if you must call it crime, take it from me, not them." Something in her composure unsettled him. He muttered to his men, then swung back onto his wagon. "You watch yourself, Ward," he spat. "You're bound to that thief now." When they were gone, Elias turned to her. "You didn't need to do that." "Yes, I did," she said. "A woman's got to end her own shame before she can begin again." He nodded, the weight of her words settling deep. The sky was purple now, the light fading fast. He took a step closer. "Then maybe tonight's the start of something new." Her breath caught. She looked up at him, eyes bright with exhaustion and something like hope. "Maybe," she whispered. From the barn, the windmill groaned as the breeze caught its blades. He hadn't known she'd fixed it. The next morning broke clear, the air washed clean by the storm that had rolled through the night. The earth was soft again, the smell of damp soil carrying a promise Elias had nearly forgotten existed. He stepped out onto the porch with his coffee, feeling the stillness settle around him. Across the yard, Clara knelt in the small patch of green they'd carved from the dust, her skirt hemmed dark with dew. The children were chasing each other between the fence posts, laughter skimming like birds over water. For a while he simply watched. There was something about the sight that steadied him, the quiet rhythm of her hands working the earth, the patience in the way she guided the littlest one to plant a seed, the sunlight burning gold through her hair. The world no longer looked abandoned. It looked alive. When she saw him, she wiped her brow and smiled. "Ground's near ready," she said. He nodded, setting his cup down on the rail. "You've done more with it in a week than I managed in years." She laughed softly. "You gave it a chance to breathe, that's all." Her words landed deeper than she meant them to. For years, Elias had lived as though the ranch itself were a grave marker, something to tend, not to love. But now, with the sound of laughter and the smell of tilled soil, the house felt like it had exhaled. He wondered if maybe he had, too. They spent the day working side by side. The sun rose high, their shadows shrinking and spreading again as they moved along the rows. When the eldest boy brought water from the well, Elias ruffled his hair, and the boy grinned, proud and shy. By dusk, they had finished enough to rest. Clara stood back, looking at the neat furrows. "Never thought dirt could look so beautiful," she murmured. Elias followed her gaze. "Everything looks different when you believe it might stay." That night, they ate on the porch. The children fell asleep in the cool grass, while crickets hummed and fireflies blinked in the dark like stray stars. Clara sat beside him, her shoulders relaxed, her face lit by the lantern's soft flame. "It's strange," she said after a while, her voice low. "For the first time in a long while, I'm not afraid to wake tomorrow." Elias looked at her, the quiet between them deep and full. "You won't have to be." She turned to him then, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath, the stillness before a door opens, the pause between sorrow and grace. He reached for her hand. It was rough from work, warm from living. She didn't pull away. Days folded into weeks. The crops began to sprout. and the fields wore a green haze under the Sunday. The sound of the windmill turned steady again, groaning its slow, patient song. Clara mended curtains, baked bread, taught the children their letters at the table where once only silence had Saturday. Elias built a pen for the goats they'd bartered from a trader, and every evening the two of them shared coffee on the porch, saying little but meaning everything. Still, shadows lingered. Once, when she thought he wasn't watching, he saw her trace the air where a ring used to be. Another time, she woke from a dream, gasping, and would not speak of it. He didn't press. Some griefs had to be carried, not cured. By midsummer, the ranch had become something neither of them had planned, a home stitched together by necessity and held by quiet faith. Word reached them that Sheriff Clancy had left Red Bluff, chasing some new trouble further north. The weight that had hung over the house began to lift. The children's laughter came easier now, no longer edged with fear. One evening, the eldest boy came running from the field, breathless and beaming. "There's corn, Ma! Real corn coming up!" he shouted. Clara laughed, a bright sound that startled even her. She turned to Elias. "You see that? You did that." He shook his head. "We did it, all of us." The moment stretched warm and golden. Then the sky broke open with light, the kind of sunset that looked more like a beginning than an ending. The horizon burned with color, red and orange, spilling like fire across the plains. Clara stood beside him, her hand finding his again, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her touch. Later, after the children were asleep, Elias walked with her down to the river where they'd first met. The water ran higher now, full and alive, whispering against the rocks. She stopped at the edge, her reflection trembling beside his. "I thought this river was gonna take me," she said quietly. "Now it feels like it's carrying me somewhere instead." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a ring, simple and worn, his mother's. He held it out to her without a word. Clara looked at it, then at him. "You sure?" He nodded. "Reckon I've been sure a while now." Her breath trembled, and she took it, the metal warm from his hand. "Then I'll wear it," she whispered. "Not to forget where I've been, but to remember where I found my way again." The river moved softly beside them, silver in the moonlight. The fields stretched behind, green and wide and waiting. Somewhere far off, the windmill turned, slow and steady, keeping time with the new life that had begun there. Elias looked out over the land, then at her. "Guess we both learned how to stay," he said. She smiled, eyes bright with quiet tears. "Staying's the hardest kind of courage." They stood together in the hush of the prairie, the night wide and full around them, the promise of morning already stirring in the east. And for the first time in many years, Elias Ward felt the world begin again.